This life can make me so confused, but it's the passage reads that we will soon see the light of day that speaks the answers and throws all doubt away. Until that happens, we seek and yet to find a special calling that calms and gives peace of mind. Spirit rises from the temple of the fallen ones. Our minds unravel and the loss of faith is now begun. We see deceit and lies all around. Our innocence lost, hopelessness now found. Whoa, whoa, I implore you to see there is so much more to this life than what we believe.
Welcome back to First Edition here on WEAA 88.9. Wow. I like that.
Thank you.
Wow, you kind of threw that on me a little bit. I didn't know that was coming. I'm speaking to Khadijah Ali-Coleman. She is the creativity coach, the Creative Midwife, founder of Liberated Muse Arts Group, and the co-host of the Dual Inspiration segment here on First Edition in the Hour of Power. That's you.
That's
singing.
Me. That's me singing.
You have a lovely voice.
Thank you very much.
And is that new? That's a new track?
That was actually the first single released off my CD, Song of a Space Cadet, before it actually was released. But it was a song I wrote in 2013 after the passing of one of my dear friends who was actually the lead, our music director for Liberated Muse. And so after his passing, we actually started going into a different direction, arts-wise. But that is really the spark that we're going to jump off from talking about today, because moving past his death really forced me to really reevaluate how to move forward, doing all the things that I was doing, that I continue to do, but really reevaluating that. And it prepared me for when less than 2 years later, my mother was killed. And so I've been writing a lot and talking with people about how to recover through through grief.
Right.
And
guilt is involved as well.
Exactly. And that was a Freudian slip, but being able to still be able to live unbound when you are living through grief. And so I just thought that was a good way to segue into this.
Oh, I think so. And you know that you and I shared that scenario, the fact that my mother was killed in 2004. So we both have had that experience, obviously. And it is a process, and sometimes arduous process, to move through it. You never get over it.
Exactly.
But to move through it.
Right.
I mean, to the point I just mentioned to a very dear friend of mine yesterday that I'm finally at the point where I can talk about my mother and her death and what happened without feeling that pain, really, and I can speak about it without becoming, choked with emotion. And it's an important place to get to, because then you can start really ministering to other people, in a really effective way. So yeah, the grief process is one that is incredibly important.
Oh, definitely. And I'm not yet there where I can say that so this is experimental right now, what we're doing. Even when I debuted my CD in Artscape last summer, I called it a musical memoir. I broke down in the middle. And, my mother was killed by police cadet in 2014 while driving to her recertification course. She was a teacher. And so it was unexpected. It was a week before Mike Brown was killed. So that was another layer, was to have this happen, and then it caught up in the melee of all of this that was happening in our country until, I'm an activist and I'm on the streets and I'm speaking and organizing around this while this happened to my mother. So there's just, it's so many layers to it. And so when I speak about grief, and as a coach, to inspire other people, when you're going through these kinds of things, self-care is of the utmost importance. Absolutely. So as I speak about this today, I need the audience to know that this is actually what I am now in practice. I am now implementing for myself. And so it really comes from a space of it's what I'm doing now. This is what has been working for me. And it's just so important, especially as we were talking earlier, what's in our news today is that we have, we hear what's going on with this person that has been dubbed the Cleveland shooter, and they attribute the madness of his actions to grief. And so I just felt it would be appropriate today to talk about that. The way that we respond to grief does not have to always result in causing mayhem to other people or even to ourselves. And it really begins with practicing self-care. So I had 3 things that I wanted to share about that today.
Of course. And so as far as the grief process, from my own experience, I remember when my mother was first killed, me immediately kind of ignoring the grief process and trying to just kind of press on and suggesting that somehow, my mother would want it this way.
And being busy.
Yeah, keeping busy, working hard, working super hard. And
Do you know, I had performances after, and I was like, I'm going to keep the schedule. I'm going to, I can do this. And so I totally can relate to that.
I think, part of it is denial. Part of the process is literally denial for a lot of people. And then Thanksgiving came around, which was her favorite time, and that's when I literally had to. I almost died from grief and sadness. I just sat in my crib for 3 days and that's all I did was cry. Yeah. But that had to happen, in order for me to even get to the next level. So
I know for me, it's really manifested. It manifested poorly. I'm the oldest of 5 siblings, and so our relationships with each other have been horrible in terms of how we've been forced to deal with this individually. But I know that when we talk about grief, or even the example that you gave, what you went through, for me, I didn't really start feeling the crushing weight of it until a year and a half later. And so for everyone, it's different. It's an excellent book. I wish I had it, the title. I don't want to mess it up, but it talks about the stages of grief and how it's not really a linear process. Right. That you can, the denial that you speak of is definitely one component of it. The denial, the anger, the immense sadness, but none of this is linear. So you could actually go through these stages, then fall back, and then come back, and then it doesn't. There's no end point where you say it's an expiration date on your grief. No. And so when we talk about self-care, we're talking about ways that we can be gentle with ourselves and understanding that this process is not linear, understanding that this process will require us oftentimes to really just push back from what our routines are. I know it sounds like you and I have very similar response patterns when we are faced with, we talked about conflict before, remember, 2 weeks ago. And so when we talk about conflict, we want to just, we're not in pain, we can do this, because it's what our ideas of what strength looks like. Right. And so when you don't address how you're really feeling inside, then that's when all of these problems and things crop up. And that's when we are absolutely not practicing self-care. So I wrote this piece for a website called The Body Is Not an Apology. Some time ago, I actually was doing some consultant work with the woman who is the founder of the space, Sonia Renee Taylor. She's a world-renowned poet. She's amazing, and she has this website where many people are able to go. It's really about self-love and self-care. And so I wrote this piece called 3 Tips for Practicing Self-Care when Grieving, and the impetus for it was my mother situation, but as I shared, I believe that, so my friend that I wrote UNBOUND based on following his passing, I believe that was really the first traumatic experience that I had with death, because it was someone that was so close in age to me. He was, and actually close in age, but I was 6 years older than him. And so he was nowhere near elderly. He didn't have any health issues that any of us were aware of. And we had just performed together. So it was one of those things that was so sudden that it just took your breath away. And, he had a stroke. And so that was very traumatic. And I realized that then with my mother passing, it's just trauma on top of trauma. Not really addressing. The arts have been really healing, but, that's one step in the process. So when the 3 tips that I shared on this website was the first thing that we need to do is be able to identify at least 3 individuals who we know who are empathetic listeners. While it really helps me with writing and journaling and writing songs and things like that, nothing has been so helpful for me as just really knowing that there's at least one person that cares enough to hear, how I'm feeling and what I'm going through. And I think that when we think of somebody, we automatically assume that person has to be someone who's a family member or someone who's a friend. But oftentimes I find that the best listeners for me are people who don't necessarily know so much about my life that they start to make judgments. Does that make sense?
Sure. It does make sense. For me, it was my sister. Okay. So it was just, we had that shared, obviously,
right.
a shared situation. And so it was very helpful,
right?
Because we could talk so personally and so
right.
intimately about our mother,
right?
That it helped us kind of just remember the beautiful things about her and in a really genuine, authentic way. So that was helpful for me. I mean, I sought counseling as well.
Okay.
Was
counseling helpful?
It was.
Okay.
It was.
In a different way.
Yeah.
It was how was it different than with your mother, if you don't mind, with your sister, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, I mean, because it was, as you just said, it was more, someone could be more objective, obviously,
right,
and make observations about me without being subjective or being a personal thing.
Right.
I remember, certain scenarios that the person would lay out that just opened my eyes, were
right.
revelatory, because they had the ability, because of professional training, number one, but also because they were able to be on the outside,
exactly,
and really see things that I couldn't see, or my sister probably couldn't see.
Exactly, and that's why I make that suggestion, and I don't always say a counselor, but definitely a counselor, someone who's trained. Also, when you're going through grief, and particularly if it's somebody that someone close to you is also grieving for, if your nature is naturally to be of nurturing and care, then what happens a lot of times is that you take on the pain, or you become more of a listener and taking on their burdens instead of really having someone who can listen to you without requiring that to be reciprocated. So that's another reason why I would recommend finding at least one person who is not so closely connected to you or the person that you're grieving. Another tip that I gave was, and I laugh because this is like really hard for me, is holding quiet space for your thoughts. And when I say that, what do you naturally think of when you hold quiet space? What does that sound like?
Meditation.
Yeah, and so that's not that's not what I mean, because meditation isn't a reality for all of us. And also sometimes for some of us, meditation sounds like work, and it sounds like you have to empty your thoughts, and sometimes being quiet.
It's not that bad. It's not that bad.
But being quiet with your thoughts, you can still have your thoughts, but being quiet, again,
giving them a chance to kind of be what they are.
Yeah.
And that's cool. I get that.
Yeah.
I totally get that.
Yeah.
And you do need that.
Yeah.
Just kind of letting it, just whatever is flying through your head, let it fly through your head.
When you were sharing that you had 3 days where you were just in your space, and as that sounds like something's wrong because you're a man on the go and you're always so busy, but that's what our spirit, and that's what we need in terms of being able to have that time to process, to be non-functioning. You know what I mean? We're a society that relies so much on being able to function through so much dysfunction that when something so traumatic happens to us, we naturally think that something's wrong when we shut down. But even if we look at machines, when they stop working, if they require some type of care that they weren't getting, and that same is for our body, the same is for our mental and spiritual health. So holding a quiet space for your thoughts was the second tip. The third is, and this is probably the most unexpected tip, but be there for others and be present with others when able. And being present with others a lot of times helps us see in others that we are not alone. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, anytime that you're able to step outside of yourself and be present for other people, sure, that makes sense.
For me personally, that has been what has really forced me to practice self-care, is in being in spaces with other people, being present with other people who are asking me how I'm doing and really concerned about how I'm doing, who are sharing with me their experiences, where I am then in a position to share my experiences back, really allows unexpected remedy. I can't even convey. I do a lot of work in the community. I organize events. I create spaces. I perform, of course, but I also create spaces for other artists to gather. Just released an anthology online on our website. And in these spaces that we're sharing our art and talking about what it was the genesis for this, what comes out of me a lot of times are things that I didn't even know existed, or feelings I didn't know existed. So being present, and there's a difference between showing up and being present. You can show up somewhere and be in attendance somewhere, but being present is really being open and observing what's going on around you. When people are talking with you, not waiting for them to just stop talking before you jump in, but really hearing what they're saying, being just sensitive to your environment around you so that you're a full participant instead of just somebody who is functioning, who is simply functioning. And that is something, when some of us are grieving and we want to still give the perception to others that we are functioning and we're okay, we get trapped into these behaviors that we think gives the impression that we're dealing with it or we're fine, but we're not present and we're not being real. And so those are 3 things that I think are a good start for somebody, because they've really been helpful for me over the last since 2014, since the passing of my mother.
So the stages of grief, I think the accepted stages are denial and isolation, which I described, anger, which I experienced abundantly, bargaining. You start trying to, if you could just, I remember having dreams about my mom, and just asking God, please, just if you bring her back a little while, whatever. I mean, it gets to that point. Depression obviously was part of it. Then acceptance, which I've kind of gotten to. It never goes away, but once you get to acceptance, it's a more peaceful place.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because bargaining, I think, is probably the hardest to.
That was the most painful.
Yeah, bargaining is something else, because it's you're either bargaining and please, let that person come back, or I promise that I won't do such and such if you promise that, nothing happens to someone else I care about, So, that whole process can be lessened. The impact really depends on who you have as a support circle, but also how you as a person tend to ask for help, and to and how you deny yourself just basic self-care. They say that Black women are the mules of the world in terms of taking on so much. And I was on Facebook today, and one of my Facebook friends, she's an alum of Morgan. I met her many years ago when I used to work here. And she wrote this very compelling piece on how it just seems like Black women are blamed for everything with the Cleveland shooter, because apparently his behavior he attributed to being dumped or some relationship he had with a woman. And so she was saying that, we can even we cannot be doing anything. We're just there and everything is our fault. And so I throw that out there, that a lot of times we blame the way that we handle grief by the parenting we received from a mother, or the parenting or the lack of parenting we received from a father. But really, a lot of the ways that we respond to grief have to do with what we believe grief should look like. And that doesn't necessarily come from parents. I look at society as a whole, where we really normalized some really unhealthy behaviors, and to the point where if anything does not look like we're okay, then automatically something is wrong. And so some of our happiest looking people are grieving inside because they have been socialized to believe that do you understand where I'm going?
Sure,
They've been socialized to believe that having grief is a sign of a symptom of unwellness, and so I don't want to appear unwell, so I'm going to continue to smile, I'm going to continue to look like I'm okay, and then it creates this domino effect of just unhealthy behavior, passive aggressiveness, violence toward others, and things like that, because we don't address what the issues are and we don't practice self-care. So
Indeed. So it is a incredibly valuable lesson that you laid out for us, Khadijah, and I appreciate you, and I say keep doing your thing, and God bless you as you continue to go through the process of grief, because it is still new for you, the death of your mother, and just to encourage you that you will get to that point of acceptance. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
Well, I always appreciate you sharing your story and sharing with us what you have shared with us. I think that when we look back on grief, like when something traumatic has happened to us to this effect, and then we look at how far we've come and how much we've accomplished, how many people we've touched from it, you can't do anything but be amazed. And that's what I look back and I'm like, wow, I'm still standing, I'm still standing.
Amen, and I say to that. Khadijah Ali-Coleman is the creativity coach, the creative midwife, and founder of Liberated Muse Arts Group. She's also one half of the Dual Inspiration team here during the Hour of Power. Khadijah, it's always good to see you, sis.
Same here.
All right. That's it. There's no more breaks. That's it. Show's over. First Edition is a production of WEAA. The show is produced by executive producer Sean Yoes, associate producer Yorio Digizua. Our board operators are Andre Melton and Ty Rice. Our First Edition interns are Isaiah George, Wyman Jones, Kristen West, Janelle Ferguson, Alex Blanc, Deja Braggs, Jonathan Williams, Miracle Chukwukaize, Drew Mitchell, and Valentin Davis. Stay tuned for Keep It Moving with Marsha Jews next, right here on Public Radio WEAA 88.9 FM, the voice of the community. I am Sean Yoes. Peace.
This life can make me so confused, but it's alright. Living day by day, I feel so used. That ain't right.